I've sort of invented a second term called desire, because demand by definition cannot exceed the supply of energy. It just can't, because there's no substitute for energy. There are people who may like to think there is, but they'll find that they're wrong. There's a substitute for cornflakes. You can have Weetabix and other things like that, but there's no substitute for energy. So, but desire can be completely unlimited. So demand must follow the supply of energy, and that's going to go down. So there will be an enforced reduction in demand, but unfortunately there won't be a concomitant reduction in desire. So there'll be the gap will open up between this notional demand, desire, and what's actually available in terms of energy. And there's one magic word, which I ought to mention as soon as possible, that can get desire and, well, actually, it can satisfy desire, but actually shrink demand very rapidly. And you think, what the devil is this magic word? And it's not a miracle. And it's a 5-letter word. It's called share. And if you start sharing, you can get real demand down extremely fast, but still, in point of fact, achieve necessary things like mobility and food production and many other things besides. But sharing is a bit tricky when you spent sort of 400 or 500 years building a liberal, individualistic, supposedly democratic society built on the ever greater apotheosis, the glorifying of the individual. And one of the things that you don't do as an individual is share. And I have to say, if you start doing sharing, and we're putting in place a solar car share programming and sharing of other kinds of things, it's actually quite tricky. So I'm not downplaying how difficult it is to share. But just think of it. If you, for instance, share one car between 20 people, and that car does double the number of miles of the average, then more or less you've reduced the amount of petroleum used for that car, multiplied by the number of people, by a factor of 10. So you've reduced per person vehicle miles traveled by roughly a factor of 10. I mean, it'll go up and down a bit, but you're talking about an enormous reduction. You're not talking about 5%. You're talking about 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% reduction. And when you start sharing, you can do all kinds of amazing things like that. And for instance, if you start sharing the envelope, especially the walls of the building envelope, as we used to do in Europe for about a couple of thousand years, you can also make massive differences in the amount of heat lost, and the amount of insulation becomes, insulation becomes automatic if one building's sharing its wall with another building. Good if it's got audio insulation, otherwise neighbors can become irritating. So these are some kinds of things which are radical in terms of behavior change, but actually mean a step back, or in my opinion, a step forward to actually sharing again as we used to have to do. It might be a bit uncomfortable in some ways, but there are possible huge gains in terms of community and possible friendships and feeling like you belong in a place a bit more. So that, in point of fact, is part of the best case scenario that requires no miracles, just sharing, a lot more communication, a lot more thinking about how we do this sharing, because as I say, it's not very simple, and it requires a rise in the level of adult behavior, which has been in somewhat decline for the last 30, 40, 50 years, and the infantilization, I'm afraid, will have to be cast into the recycling bin, and we'll have to become adults and mature about this.